I'm Emma, and this is Sarah and Hannah, and this is our final OCE project. So Sarah's going to take it away.
All right, I am going to first talk about my preamble, and my preamble is written right here, and it is equip students to embrace uniqueness within community, pursue goals, and embrace a vision for their lives. And my preamble really just speaks to my desire to help students to reach their full potential by giving them meaningful instruction and showing them their unique capabilities and really helping them to see into the future and to set goals for themselves. Because many students may be in homes where they are not given role models that set goals for themselves and pursue their highest potential, and I want to encourage this in my students. My 3D symbol that I have chosen for my project is these glasses, and these glasses have eyes on them, and these represent two things. First, they represent my students' ability to see the multicultural people around them and to recognize the different cultures represented in the classroom. And many students are not exposed to other cultures until they come to school. And I really want my students to be able to embrace the unique individuals around them and to appreciate these differences in their classmates. And the second thing that these glasses represent is the setting of goals that my students will do and having a vision to see into their future and to see their full potential that they can reach. The scriptural foundation that I have chosen for my project is Jeremiah 29:11, and this says, "For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord, plans to prosper and not to harm you, and plans to give you a future and a hope." And this verse also just speaks to God's unique purpose and plans that He has for each student that I will have in my classroom. And my overall vision for my class in the future is to create a safe and uplifting learning community that is culturally inclusive for all of my students. And I really want to teach my students to value similarities and differences and not be afraid of differences in other students, but to really appreciate and encourage the other students that they have in their class. In my action plan, I made steps to support this vision and preamble that I have chosen. The first step in my action plan is my conflict resolution plan, which I will implement in my classroom. And when there's a conflict in my classroom, both members of the conflict will have an individual meeting with me, and both individuals will state their side of the story and how they feel when the other person does a certain thing, and the other student will then repeat what the other student said in their own words, and this will help them to see the other student's perspective, and then we will all together decide on a resolution to this conflict. And this will really help each student to feel safe and recognized within my classroom. My second step is to create a star student tradition in which each week a different student will be chosen to be the star student, and they will present to the entire class about their family, their background, their values, and their likes and dislikes. And this will help all of my students to learn about each other and to appreciate the different backgrounds and cultures that each student comes from. And my third step is to create learning groups in my classroom, and these learning groups will be used for collaborative learning, and I will group students with other students who are different from themselves so that they will learn about other students within the classroom, and this will really create a community in my classroom. The last thing that I'm going to talk about is my interview that I conducted for this, and I interviewed my pastor at my church, Pastor Lundeen, and we both agreed that we grew up in a mainly white and Caucasian society, and this really has an influence on how I view other people. Because I grew up in a society where everyone looked pretty much the same as me, now when I see people who look different from me that are a different race, sometimes I tend to judge them and place stereotypes upon them because of their race and just assume things about them. And Pastor Lundeen and I just discussed how this really isn't good and how we're both working on seeing people for who they truly are and not just seeing their race. And we also discussed how I'll use my faith in my classroom. And in my class, I really desire to see each student as God would see them and really encourage their full potential. And that is all I have.
For my OCE project, I want to start by talking about my interview. And actually, my dad is my pastor, and I was able to talk to him over Thanksgiving break just about human relations and the different stuff we had talked about in this class, and just about the different things that I've taken out of it. And I just kind of realized that I just felt a lot more equipped after human relations, just about talking about difficult situations, for example, like Ferguson in Missouri, or different racist or racism things in the classroom that I had never thought about before. So that was something that I really grabbed from human relations that I talked a lot about in my interview, and just about realizing in myself different stereotypes that I might have put on different races, or different, just different presupposed thoughts about people that really weren't accurate or true. And starting off with my preamble, which I have up there, never giving up on students. I will give them the tools to expand their education and see worth in themselves. And this really, I thought a lot about it, and it's kind of more of a process, which I'll get to later about my preamble. But I first want to start off with my Bible verse that I really found that convicted me during this semester about education. It was Matthew 9:37-38. And it's Jesus talking with his disciples, and Then he said to his disciples, the harvest is plentiful, but the laborers are few. Therefore, pray earnestly to the Lord of the harvest to send out laborers into his harvest. And I just was really thinking about it, and in reality, like as a Christian, that's our first thing, is we're laborers out there in the world for Christ, and that's the most important thing about our lives. And as a teacher, how does this play out in the classroom? And so that's really what I wrote my paper on, and my action plan on, is how, as a Christian in the classroom, how is that going to impact my teaching? Even though I can't straight up minister the gospel to my students with my mouth, with my words, I can provide like actions and be an example to them and to be a light. So my symbol I chose, kind of cliche, but the cross. I thought a lot about what I wanted to use as my symbol, and I just really couldn't get off of that idea of what's really the most important thing in this life, and it is the cross, and it's Christ, and just how he is the most important thing as a teacher, how I shouldn't branch away from that much. But how this ties into my classroom is just even Christ dying on the cross. He didn't just die for one race. He didn't just die for one group of people. He died for all of us, all the followers of Christ. And just how, as a teacher, I'm not just teaching one race, and I'm not just teaching a certain group of people. I'm teaching so many different kids with so many different backgrounds, and that's so important to remember as a teacher. And another area, like going off of that, is as a teacher, then being a follower of Christ, I have to remember that, and then tie that into my lessons and tie that into my classroom, where I'm not just teaching one group of kids, therefore to the glory of God. I have to learn how to successfully create my lessons to reach all different cultures and all of my students and their different backgrounds. So that's how my 3D symbol ties into the classroom. And how that ties into my preamble then is just never giving up on my students, because the cross is so important, and that's our main purpose, and God never gave up on us. As shown when he died on the cross, I have to try so hard to never give up on my students. And so the first part of my preamble, never giving up on my students, that's where that comes from, is I really want to show my students that no matter what, I'm there for them, and that even if their home background isn't very successful, or their parents aren't being very involved in their home lives, or if just academically they're really struggling and they don't believe in themselves, I want them to see that I believe in them, and that I'll fight for them, and that I'll show them that that I'll help them overcome what they're doing somehow. Also, just how this plays out also is just praying for my students too, like when I'm not in the classroom, even though they don't know I'm praying for them, even just having them on my heart is a super big deal. Another part in my preamble, I said I will give them the tools to expand their education and see worth in themselves. That ties into the first part, never giving up on my students. I want to show them that education, you can overcome and you can achieve, and once you break through that and see all that you can achieve, it's super cool to just keep going in your education. I never thought I would be a teacher someday, but just working hard and getting to this spot, it's been really cool to see all that I've accomplished. Another way that this plays out in the classroom is creating a culturally inclusive environment. I want to make sure that the environment in my classroom is a community of united students and myself, and that as that kind of a classroom that we can learn together and put aside cultural differences while at the same time keeping them close to our hearts and valuing them as well, because it is important, all of our differences, and they make us unique in who Christ made us, and we're all in the image of God. So that was super important too. A couple of things that I'm going to have to keep in mind that I wrote about in my paper, my action plan, is just different things like presupposed racism with my students, and maybe there's some presupposed thoughts that they have about other culture groups, that even different things like courageous conversations will have to happen in my classroom, and I'll have to be courageous enough to talk about those with my class, or even just their families and where they come from. Just stuff like for example, like having a Hmong family, I might not know much what it's like, but I'll need to like research and get to know like their culture so that I can better teach them. And yeah, I guess that's basically it. So my final just like OCE action plan then is really just to take the cross into the classroom and hopefully make a difference in all of my kids' lives and teach them to the glory of God. So.
Okay, well, I'm the last one here in this project, and I'd just like to start out with my preamble, which I have right here, and it's committed to a safe learning environment that encourages the acceptance of all students and diversities. And this is something that I really focused on with my interview with my former water polo coach, Coach Will, and I. She's a educator right now in the high school that I went to, and we just discussed how important diversity and acceptance is within a classroom, and she really agreed with everything that I've been learning in this class, and that I can't come in thinking that I know everything about every culture and every student in my class, because I don't, and it's a big learning process. And I also focused on with her as an unbeliever how this is going to affect me as a believing woman and a woman of God, and how I'm going to take that into my classroom. And although she isn't a believer, she really encouraged me to go in with the attitude that a believer would go into the classroom with. And so therefore, my symbol is a flashlight, and there's also a flashlight on here. And I chose a few different reasons. Like, I chose the flashlight for a few different reasons, and one is that a flashlight gives safety, and that's going back to my preamble. And I want my students to be safe and feel safe, and safe to tell me anything that they need or any help they need, and be open with me and other students in the room. It's a safe place where they can come to me with questions and new ideas, or if they're not comfortable with something, and a place where they won't be judged. And another reason why I chose a flashlight is for guidance. We use a flashlight to find our way in the dark, and so a lot of the time these kids are in the dark, or they're having, which is their trouble, and that could be many different things, such as dealing with race or ethnicity and religion or disability, or even things like bullying. And this flashlight or this light is going to be a guidance for them that they will succeed, and they will get through this, and they will have academic success. And one thing I wanted to focus on with the flashlights is that they're all different. This light is not going to shine the same as this light. And so one thing I wanted to focus on with my students and relating it to my preamble is that we all have a different kind of light, and we all see something different in the dark, whatever your darkness even is. And it's important for students and myself as the teacher to know what each student is seeing, and how it's different from mine, but how I can learn from that, and how other students in the class can learn from that. We all come from different backgrounds, so we're going to see something different, a different path for each of us. And one verse that I really liked, and I thought went closely with this, was John 1:5, and it says, "The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it." And one thing as a believer that's important in this is that when we have the Lord in our hearts, there's a light in us, and even when there's this little flicker of light, it's still making the darkness go away for a certain distance. And that's going to be my students in my classrooms, and that's even going to be me learning and developing as a teacher, that some students could have this little flicker of hope, and some students can have like a construction flashlight that's so bright, and they just see so much and they understand so much and have so much hope. But as the teacher, I really want to push my kids and let them know that I'm there for them. I'm rooting for them. I want them to have academic success. I want them to have success in general. And I don't want to let them down. I want to make that light grow bigger and bigger as their teacher. And I want that light for myself to grow bigger in learning about different ethnicities, and not having presuppositions about cultures and different backgrounds, or judging people because of the way they look or they act. I want to be accepting of those students and learn new strategies and ways to teach them that will make them helpful and make that light grow even bigger, so that they see more of the bigger picture there. And this all just relates back to my preamble, that I want it to be safe. I want it to be encouraging. I don't want students to get discouraged and have their light go down. I want their light to get bigger. And I just, all in all, I want to do this through my faith in the Lord. And none of that's possible. The greatest light that we could have is Him. And I want my light, because of Him, to shine so bright that it's going to reflect onto my students, and they're going to see that hope and that faith that they can get through it, and they will get through it, and that I want them to. And that is about all.
So those were our action plans and our symbols. And now to close us out, we're each just going to share something that was really meaningful to us that we learned in the class, or an assignment that really impacted us. So for me, an assignment that really impacted me was the multicultural self paper that we wrote. It was really interesting for me to think back throughout my whole life about my family background, my culture, my values, just the socioeconomic level that I grew up in, how all of those different factors influence who I am, and they also influence my education. And as I come into the classroom, those elements are all influencing me and how I'm learning, and there's so many different people in the classroom, and each person is a unique individual. So I was really impacted by that assignment, and even hearing different people in our class share about their papers was really, really impactful for me, just to realize how everyone is different and how everyone brings different things to the classroom.
Probably the most different idea of thinking about something in the classroom that I really enjoyed, that was kind of stretching for me, was the idea of having courageous conversations in the classroom. And I've been always kind of a passive person, in past experiences, and this class has really kind of toughened me up and grown me up in that area. And just knowing that it is important to have those tough conversations, and it can be the solution to hard things. And even just realizing in my recently too, seeing that I have been able to grow in that area has been really huge. Another assignment that I really grew in, it was also the multicultural one, and just realizing before, I didn't really think I had a culture just because I felt like the norm around here, but it's such a little thought to think that when really everyone is so unique.
And the thing that I think that I found the most interesting and meaningful was definitely the multicultural self. And just thinking about all the factors that make my multicultural self and how that affects my life and the ways I think and the ways I act, I didn't realize that there were so many elements of my multicultural self and how that develops me as a person. And looking at the differences and how like the person next to me isn't going to have the same multicultural self as me, and that's going to reflect in my students. They're not the same as me, and they're definitely not the same with each other. So I really thought I enjoyed it, and I felt like I got a lot out of the multicultural self and thinking more deeply on how I'm going to take those elements into effect in how I teach my students. So yeah. That's it.
That's all we have.